Welcome back. We're going to jump forward today to chapter 6 of Revelation, verses 15 to 17, where we read, "And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, 'Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?'" And I want to talk about this idea of the wrath of God and how it works. I think this can best be illustrated by jumping back to the Old Testament, to the book of Daniel and chapter 5, where we read the story of Belshazzar's feast. Belshazzar, the king, holds a great feast, and he brings out from the royal treasury the cups and the vessels that have been taken by the Babylonians from the temple in Jerusalem, and they use them as part of the feast. At the point when they do that, a hand appears from nowhere and writes on the wall, and the king sees it and looks for one of his wise men or soothsayers to interpret the writing. As is often the case in the book of Daniel, no one can be found to interpret the writing until the queen comes to Belshazzar and recommends he talk to Daniel. Daniel is brought in, and he delivers quite a long speech to Belshazzar. He reflects on the history of one of the previous kings, Nebuchadnezzar, and particularly he refers to Nebuchadnezzar's experience that's recorded in chapter 4. He says this towards the end of this speech: "But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you and your lords, your wives and your concubines, have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways you have not glorified." So Daniel's point is this: Belshazzar would be familiar with the history and the experience and the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of chapter 4, acknowledges God, having been humbled and made like a beast of the field because of his own pride, and then restored to the kingdom. But Belshazzar's own pride has overtaken him, and he has not learnt the lessons of history. So we have to ask, why, at the end of chapter 5, was Belshazzar slain? Was it because he drank of the vessels that were stolen from the temple in Jerusalem? Well, no, it wasn't. He drank from the vessels stolen from the temple in Jerusalem because of his own pride, and despite the fact that he knew everything that he knew about Nebuchadnezzar's experience. And it was his own pride also that brings him down. I think of Belshazzar as something like the son of the self-made millionaire. You know, the man who establishes the company, who makes the money, but then his son, raised in this life of relative ease and luxury, doesn't learn the hard lessons that are required to look after the money, to maintain it, and indeed to help it to grow. Belshazzar is merely sitting back in this luxurious life in which he's been raised. And so the kingdom is taken from him because of his pride, because of his failure actually to behave in the way you would expect a king to behave. And that is the wrath of God at work. Not that God needs to do anything to us, but we do it to ourselves. In his exposition of Revelation, in a book called Apocalypse Explained, Swedenborg refers to Psalm 7. And he says this: "It is here attributed to God that he is indignant with the wicked, that he whets his sword, that he bends and makes ready his bow, prepares instruments of death, and makes his arrows burning. But in the spiritual sense, it is meant that man does this in respect to himself. It is the evil man who is indignant with God. He acquires for himself falsity, by which he combats against truths. He frames for himself doctrine opposed to truths. And from infernal love he frames for himself principles of falsity by which he destroys good and its truth. Elsewhere, Swedenborg writes, "Every good has its reward attached to it, and every evil its punishment. Such is the equilibrium of all things in the other life, in both general and particular, that evil punishes itself, so that in evil there is the punishment of evil. Hence, everyone brings punishment and torment upon himself, and rushes at the same time among the diabolical crew who inflict such torment." The naturally minded person thinks of God as angry or jealous or vengeful or punishing. But a spiritually minded person sees that God is love, as it says in Scripture, and love is incapable of such anger. It's incapable of punishment. It is the nature of evil that is essentially self-defeating. Look, there are many places in Scripture which talk about the wrath of God. What we need to do is understand that the God who is love is not capable of the wrath that is attributed to him. This is the evil person who blames God for the situation he finds himself in and which he has brought upon himself. One of the big problems with the wrath of God is it so often gets used as this big stick, in the same way that hell is used as a big stick to try and compel us to belief. But in reality, that belief that is stimulated by that big stick is fairly superficial. The faith that leads to salvation is about following the God who is love and implementing what is loving in our lives. As always, you're welcome to drop a comment below. I look forward to having a chat with you. Keep it friendly, and I'll talk to you next time.